over this weekend, spanned from Saturday into Sunday. Many hours and quite a lot of work went into this. So Major Dave Johnson, he's the major over the Special Operations Bureau, which houses our SWAT team. He's here to give some remarks and answer some questions. Okay, Major.
Thanks, sir. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. Early morning hours of Saturday, this past Saturday, March 11th, the Steele Creek Division responded to multiple 911 calls for service from members of the Greers Fork community regarding Mr. Ty and the fact that he had been communicating threats to his neighbors and the police over a megaphone since about 5 o'clock Saturday morning. Mr. Ty was experiencing a worsening mental health crisis and was known by his neighbors to have access to weapons. And once officers arrived, his family members there confirmed to us that there were weapons in the house. Mr. Ty has been the subject of numerous previous calls for service. In fact, 46 calls for service since 2017 and 17 calls for service just in the last 12 months alone. Officers quickly learned that Mr. Ty had an outstanding order for arrest for a previous communicating threats charge. He also had an outstanding criminal summons also for communicating threats. So 2 outstanding criminal processes. Officers on scene alerted and engaged our community policing crisis response team. They were familiar with Mr. Ty as well due to numerous previous dealings with him, and they also obtained an involuntary commitment order for a mental health evaluation that morning. 2 of the community members who were subject to the threats that particular morning went to the magistrate's office. They applied for and received 2 additional arrest warrants for communicating threats for the threats that Mr. Ty had committed on Saturday. The patrol officers initiated communication with Mr. Ty in an effort to de-escalate him and have him come outside and peacefully surrender. However, he refused to do so. He remained inside, barricaded inside his residence, and continued to make threats to harm himself and harm others. After some time of attempting this, several on-duty SWAT team members who were already at work responded to this scene to assist, to provide some tactical expertise and training and equipment to try to bring this to a peaceful resolution. It was during this time that Mr. Ty briefly appeared in the doorway of the residence, and he was brandishing a handgun at that time. At about 11 o'clock, the decision was made to initiate our entire SWAT team, have a full SWAT team call out, which includes our crisis negotiation team. The negotiators engaged Mr. Ty in communication. However, he continued to refuse to peacefully surrender and continued to make threats against himself and the police. At about 5 p.m. on Saturday, Mr. Ty again appeared in the doorway brandishing a handgun. One of our team members perceived a lethal threat and fired a single shot. Mr. Ty was not struck and then retreated back into the house and continued to barricade himself. Negotiation and de-escalation efforts continued throughout the night and into Sunday afternoon, during which time 4 of our CMPD drones were damaged, and a very expensive bomb squad robot was also damaged by Mr. Ty with a baseball bat. At about 1:30 on Saturday, 1:30 in the afternoon, Mr. Ty thankfully finally surrendered. He exited the house and was taken into custody. Mr. Ty was found to have 2 handguns on his person at the time that he was taken into custody. He was then transported for a mental health evaluation pursuant to the Involuntary Commitment Order, and after that evaluation, he will answer for his criminal charges. We are proud of the work that our officers did to bring this to a peaceful resolution. As always, the SWAT team's #1 goal is preservation of life, and we're thankful that that was achieved in this case. I'd also like to thank our partners at Medic and CFD, who are always there with us in these types of situations every step of the way. The CMPD bomb squad, who sacrificed one of their robots in this effort, and the community members of Greers Fork, who, in spite of this tremendous inconvenience, graciously gave us access to their homes and provided verbal support to everyone that was out there. And that's especially like to take the opportunity to thank and recognize the members of our CMPD SWAT team. They stayed on the phone with Mr. Ty this entire time. They stood in the rain overnight. They laid on the cold ground for many hours to achieve this outcome, and we're proud of the work that they do each and every day. So I'll be glad to take any questions that you have.
Major question for you. First part, when we talk about like a SWAT situation like this, 30 plus hours, what goes into determining whether to move in hour 5 or let it go on as long as this situation went on?
It really depends on the actions of who we're negotiating with, who the subject is inside. If we're achieving cooperation and we're moving towards a goal of resolution, then we allow those things to occur, right? If that danger continues and we don't see progress being made, then we change our tactics, but always with the goal of preservation of life in mind.
And for clarification, when the shot was fired, could you comment more, like what actually did he point the gun at the officer? What was the perceived threat? That's
all part of an ongoing investigation by our homicide unit, but I'll just say this, that it illustrates the danger that this gentleman was to the community, and the danger that we ask our men and women of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department to place themselves in every day, especially in this case. Another question.
A lot of this talking about mental health, and there's a mental health crisis happening. You said CMPD has been called out multiple times over the last few years. Can you explain a little bit of the process of what has happened, him returning home, and just a bigger aspect of mental health and how this is something that you have to deal with, CMPD officers going into a situation knowing that there have been calls multiple times before?
Yeah, we are, CMPD is unfortunately had to take on the role of injecting ourselves into that mental health community, right, with forming our own community policing crisis response team to try to address incidents like this, because so many of the folks that we come into contact with are experiencing some form of mental health crisis, and we know that. We're thankful for those folks and the role that they play. However, it's very frustrating. Of course, society in general has decided to kind of disinvest in mental health resources, and that's true, everywhere across the country. The result of that is we see these folks at home and in the community, and when they're not being housed when they should be, when they're not medicated as they should be, or not seeking the proper help, it becomes a community problem, which then sometimes leads to a policing problem. I don't know what the short-term answer to that is. It's a bigger problem than us, but I know we're taking all the steps we can to address it.
I guess let me follow up to that question. You mentioned there were like 46 calls since 2017 and 17 calls in recent months. I know police, you may not be able to do something, but is it something maybe the community, that's a lot of calls.
It is.
For the same type of issue. What can be done to make sure that you don't get to 46 calls?
Good question. If you come up with an answer to that, please, we'll take suggestions. But we keep responding, right? If the family's in crisis, we're going to respond. If the neighbors are in crisis and they're perceiving a threat, we're going to respond. Now, we're limited. Of course, we turn them over to the mental health professionals who evaluate them, get them stabilized. If they have criminal charges to answer for, they answer, get bonded out or sign themselves out, and then they're right back in the community, and then it's up to them and their family members, if there are any, to make sure that their treatment is managed and it's maintained. And of course, that doesn't always happen, and it's a cycle that we see repeating itself over and over.
Major, can you talk about maybe the last 2 or 3 hours of the standoff? What changed with the negotiations and the negotiators that you currently had on? What made him ultimately decide to give himself up?
His condition was deteriorating the longer this went on. Our negotiator, we had one particular negotiator that had developed some connection with him and was able to convince him of some things that coaxed him out of the house. It took a lot of talent and skill and experience to get to that point. He had also, during the course of our negotiations, he had reached out to the FBI. He had reached out to the DOJ, to the Veterans Administration, numerous other entities who referred him back to us since we were on scene negotiating. But our negotiators did a fantastic job over that time of many, many hours of talking, many times in circles, many times lost in his psychosis and conversations that had nothing to do with him coming out. But our negotiators did a fantastic job to bring him out, and we're glad that it had the ending that it did.
You said he reached out to Veterans Affairs. Is he a veteran?
He's not. No. Anything else?
Are those tactics part of, I know there's also been a big push, like, to get police departments and the training when you have someone who's experiencing a mental health episode. Are there, the officers that respond, are they trained and to be able to handle?
So we have a much higher percentage than the national average of officers who are crisis intervention trained, CIT. All of our CPCRT officers have specialized training on top of CIT. They are partnered with a mental health clinician when they respond to these, who are mental health professionals. So yeah, we train that, we find value in that, and we invest our time and our resources towards addressing that.
Majors, the length of the overall standoff, about 30 hours. The success of the negotiators that you referenced before, is that why this lasted so long?
Is the success why it lasted so long?
Like you said that they made a connection with him.
Finally,
is
yes.
that why you were willing to give it so much time? Because it seems like this lasted longer than usual.
It did, and like I said, a lot of that depends on the reaction of the subject, right, that we're dealing with. A lot of times in negotiations, you look at it as a stair step to the desired outcome, right, to them making a decision to resolve this. And you can go up those steps and back down those steps multiple times during the course of a negotiation. So it may look like they're about to surrender, they're walking to the door, and this happened multiple times during the course of this event. Hey, he's coming to the door, he says it's coming out, and then something switches, they change their mind, and we're back to step one all over again. So it's just it's an up and down roller coaster of a ride whenever you're dealing with somebody having as troubling a mental health crisis as this gentleman was.
Major, can we talk about the drones and the robot for a second?
Sure.
How was he able to make contact with drones? Because we view drones as flying over. So how was he able to make contact with the drones, and how much does the robot and the drones cause? Like, how much property damage is that?
So the drones and the robots, right? Anything that we send into the house, the goal is to one, see what's going on inside the house, see where they are they still armed, are they not armed, what's their condition, but it's also to avoid sending officers inside the house, right? What we want to avoid is an armed face-to-face confrontation with the subject who's inside and experiencing crisis, right? So we'll send any number, any amount of equipment that it takes to do that versus sending an officer in to avoid that face-to-face confrontation and the trauma that causes for not only the subject, his family, the officer, right, that may or may not have to pull the trigger, and the other officers that are there. We want to avoid that at all costs if possible. So that's why we're perfectly willing to send equipment in there all day long. The drones are not too incredibly expensive, but we can, they're small enough that we can fly them inside to have a look around. Once we exhausted the 4 that we had on scene, we decided to call in the bomb squad's robot to navigate inside, but he was able to get to it with a bat before we could get him out of the way, and down they went. So they're expensive, right, in the grand scheme of things, but small price to pay to bring this to a resolution.
Did he have a window or a door open? This how you guys were able to fly the drones in?
The front door, yeah, the front door had been breached,
okay.
So we were able to get equipment inside. Yeah.
And was he home was anyone else inside the home at the time?
No one. The mother was there initially, but we got her safely out of the house. She assisted us with some of the negotiation, and at the conclusion of this, we made sure that we provided her with resources to make sure that she had housing and resources that she needed, so that we could minimize the impact of this on the mother.
Can you explain some of the damage to the home? I know driving by today, there was people pulling out their cameras and taking pictures. Mm-hmm. It's pretty destroyed on the outside. Just how it got to that point and what kind of what
Sure.
led to that?
So, like I said, the whole goal is to avoid, right, face-to-face armed confrontations. And if that requires us to breach a door, right, or breach a window, to give us a tactical advantage where officers can see inside the house from a position of cover where we're safe, they're safe, but we can see better what's going on inside the house. And it also reduces that person's sense of security and comfort too, right? To encourage them, if they don't feel safe inside the house, you know, we hope that it encourages them to come out and bring this to a peaceful resolution. So the damage you see, again, is just like our equipment. We'd much rather damage that house than the alternative.
I may have missed this release. Do you have any information on the suspect, the name, spelling?
His name is Anh, A-N-H, last name Thai, T-H-A-I, and the address was 3855 Greer's Fork Drive.
Talking about the mental health crisis, it's something that's being discussed across the nation. There are gaps in the system. Do you think if those gaps or cracks aren't closed soon, that something like this could end up in a much more deadly situation for not only the suspect, but for all of CMPD that was responding to this?
Well, it's not just candid. I mean, it has. We've seen it manifest itself across the country in any number of examples. You know, we could talk about that all day long, but short answer, yes, absolutely. All right, one more question. Anything else? I'm sorry?
How old is Mr. Ty?
32, I believe, 32 years old. All right, one more. Anything else? All right, thanks again for coming.
Thanks, Major. Just real briefly, we will be updating our media release or posting on our media the information for the suspect's name and date of birth. Okay, moving forward. All right, thanks.